Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies podcast. My name is Toby Miller, and my guest today is
Kai Schnier. And I'm a journalist. I'm an editor. Probably I'd like to say editor before journalist because I've always been slightly uncomfortable with the journalist denomination for some reason. And I'm also now the host of a podcast called Un-American that I just started 2 months ago,
Un-American.
and which Toby Miller has been on as the last guest, I might want to add.
Well, one of the interesting things about that term un-American is, first of all, its connotations with McCarthyism and the House Un-American Activities Committee of particularly the post-war period, but also the idea that something is un-American in terms of its values or its speech form or whatever. And I hear things being described as un-British. I don't hear un-Spanish. Does one say something is un-German?
No, it's not. But I think that's also has a good reason because I feel like American in the US is connotated positively at times, at least by a certain demographic of people. And in Germany, you'd have nowadays you would find a lot of people who think Germanness is something good, but I think for a long, long time, and in my opinion, that's a good thing. It was not connotated very well, like nationalism, this nationalistic idea of identifying as German first. I think that was not just something negative. So you wouldn't. It's just un-German wouldn't come up in a conversation because being un-German would be a good thing, you know.
But if we were members of the AfD, it would be good to be German and bad to be un-German. Is that what you're
Ex
suggesting?
exactly. That's what I mean. So now it's coming back. I think now this like trend towards nationalism is definitely coming back. Big style, I would say, in Germany right now with the last regional elections and the last elections in Thuringia and Saxony, with the right-wing party gaining way beyond 20%, which is has been unheard of, up to 30%, and yeah, definitely coming back. But I do think for a long time when I grew up in the 90s, early 2000s. There was really still this like very uncomfortable feeling related to Germanness in Germany. Like you wouldn't see what you see in the US, for example. You wouldn't see a lot of German flags flying. Actually, the German flags flying came back to Germany I'm already going on a tangent here. You got to stop me. Came back in 2006 with the World Cup.
World Cup.
Yeah, that was the first time you'd see a lot of German flags flying again. That's also like being pinpointed to by many commentators as the return of nationalism in a way. Identifying with the national team. That's an easy into a certain sense of national pride for
Mm.
many
Mm.
people. Yeah.
And I wonder if you'd share with us an answer to my standard question to guests, which is to say what's currently interesting, impeding, dynamizing, preoccupying you. What are you thinking about?
So I moved to the US with my partner in March of
Mm.
this year from Berlin, where I lived for 12 years and she lived for 5 years. And then we resettled to the US, to Richmond, Virginia, which is quite a different city than Berlin, Germany, you might imagine, because her family is from Virginia. And I've been, I think, mostly concerned with the pragmatic things of that move in the first
Mm.
place. What does it mean to go here? What does it mean to get a green card? All these things, which are now kind of fading away because we've kind of figured everything out, which is nice. And now I think the two things that are really concerning me are one, related to the podcast, of course, because in the podcast that I started, I'm actually using that move kind of in order to make sense of the US for myself and talk
Yes.
to people from outside the US about the United States and what's going on in the United States. And I do feel I'm just in this moment where I'm getting used to living here and I'm seeing more clearly, or I'm just seeing specific things, maybe not more clearly, but I'm seeing specific things about the US debates and about what's going on politically in the US that maybe friends of mine from the US don't see as much, just because I just moved here. I feel like that happens every time you move somewhere. You just, certain things stick out to you. And I'm just, it goes from very small things to very big things, and that's what I'm interested in right now. How is the US culturally different from Germany, for example, where I used to live for a long time, or just different places? What makes it good and bad to live here? And that's been a really like interesting ride. And with the podcast, I have this format to bounce off my ideas to you or to other people and debate them, which is very nice. Actually, with the Un-American explanation that you gave earlier, is exactly what I intended. It's like the one thing is the notion that I am un-American biologically. I'm not an American, but I'm also suggesting that in the podcast we talk about ideas that are not ideas that would be very popular in the mainstream American debate, and potentially progressive and leftist, you know. So that's the one thing. And the other thing is, of course, because I am realizing now, since I've moved here, because my partner is working in graphic design and in writing, also in journalism, but so she's always been attached to graphic design, and I'm attached to political science and international relations, which I studied. And I've always worked more in political journalism and political magazines, let's say. I'm always into political debates. And right now, I think, of course, the last couple of weeks, couple of months, it's been the US election and what's going on there. But it's also been, especially, I think, the way the election is portrayed, the media is portraying the election. And one very big thing that I just talked to somebody about for the podcast is Israel-Gaza, which I just find a topic that just doesn't stop, especially because now you don't just say Israel-Gaza anymore, but I would probably say Israel-Gaza, West Bank, Lebanon. So it's slowly expanding. And also the way that the US looks at that and Germany looks at that, which I find very painful, let's say, every once in a while.
I'm very struck by the fairly recent column by Habermas and colleagues, which basically says, because of Nazism, we must support whatever Israel does.
Has been the German position since the beginning of this conflict, and before that, there is no going anywhere else but full support for Israel, which I find a very misleading thing to say. Support for Israel. What does that mean? Which Israel? Are we supporting a right-wing government, or are we supporting the people who live in Israel, or a certain part of the population? That is up to debate, I feel like, but not up to debate in Germany.
No, and the old boy is showing a lot of instrumental rationality and the heavy hand of history rather than communicative rationality, rather than seriously listening to all points of view. I mean, to be fair to him, he's in his late 90s, but it's obviously a position he's always held, and I find that very striking. Anyway, away from that, I wanted to ask you about the immigrant experience, if I could. It's
Sure.
a huge issue in US politics at the moment. It's a huge issue in European politics at the moment. One of the differences is the spellbinding inarticulacy of US politicians, where somebody who is only mildly articulate in English, like Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, is spellbinding in their oratory, by contrast with people who can barely put two words together. And this is true of almost every politician in the US, apart from Bernie Sanders, on the national level. But if you go to the staffers in the Senate and some in the House, the policy briefs, the attorneys, it's another story. They're often deeply impressive. So I guess one of the things I've found quite remarkable in the contemporary immigration debates is just how mindless they are and stupid.
I would give at least Obama the credit where credit is due, because I do feel like he's an engaging speaker. I know that you're very rhetorically gifted, but I think he's a better public orator than I would be. But I do agree with the notion that there is many people on the surface of politics, or in the representative function of politics, who have less interesting things to say than people who are working in the background, which has always struck me in Germany as well, which is I can just share a little part of what I did in Germany. Is I ran a magazine called Kulturaustausch, which is pretty much funded by the Foreign Office, but independent by the Foreign Office, funded by the institution that publishes the magazine, which is the Institute on Foreign Cultural Relations. So that's I don't know what you would compare to in the US necessarily, but it's like the Goethe Institute that many people know. So a cultural...
not at a governmental level, but somewhat akin to the Council on Foreign Relations.
Yes. Less of a think tank, I would say. Less of a think tank interested in doing research, but more of an institution interested in funneling money into exchanges between foreign countries and Germany, doing art exhibitions around the world, and publishing this magazine. And that magazine is pretty much based around the idea that we took a debate every edition, a debate or a topic that, like climate change, an idea like can be more lofty ideas like love, guilt, and we invited people from abroad, from mostly Asia, South America, and Africa, to write about that topic from different angles. So from an international perspective, and then translated it into English and German. So it was like publicly available to German readers, but also to international readers. And of course, because it was financed by the Foreign Office through that institution, sometimes we were definitely independent. We didn't have to talk about the issues that we are talking about in the magazine with people in the Foreign Office, but there was meetings with the people in the Foreign Office in different functions. And I was struck by exactly what you said. There's many, many young, very, very smart people working in the background.
Yes.
For example, regarding issues that we're talking about today, like populism, like Israel, Gaza, all of these things, very, very smart people. But then people in the foreground, oftentimes not as smart, or I would say probably because they're from a different generation as well, not as accepting of complexity, maybe having very, very, very set opinions on what's wrong and what's right. And I think in my generation and downwards and younger, I feel like there's more people who accept that things can be complicated, and there's not one way.
The magazine is outstanding, and a couple of fairly recent dossiers, one on Mexico and one on indigenous peoples, really outstanding. And I guess I read it as a bit like Deutsche Welle or France 24 or the BBC World Service. Left/liberal, anti-dictatorship, anti-corporate malfeasance, very internationalist, pro-multicultural, pro-environmental. And obviously, if those are fair characterizations of the magazine, of Deutsche Welle in its international idiom, of France 24, of the BBC World Service, of Al Jazeera, I would say also, in terms of the sort of global news outlets that one has access to. That means they're running a fine line when it comes to dealing with bastard regimes like the one that owns Al Jazeera, the interests of bastard regimes like the British government, or the interest of any ordinary foreign policy outfit like the German state or the French one. And I think there's something about the old-fashioned notion of public broadcasting and the arm's length that we see in the post-war period in Western Europe that's quite relevant here. But your case is somewhat different because it's not broadcast media or online media. It's written, but it's also very visual as a magazine, isn't it? And so I think it's interesting that you speak of having very significant autonomy, but I suspect if you were running an IFD line uncritically, there'd be problems.
I would first of all say that I think let's say we could work very autonomously. It's like autonomy through insignificance, maybe. That's how I always explain it to people. I think there was zero backlash to anything because there was just not enough people to care about reading a print magazine in that size. And the funding also, I think the funding aspect is a big one because that magazine started out very small, very, very small. And I actually interned there and was a trainee there in 2013, maybe 2014. And then it was still the chief editor and two part-time editors and I think two interns who ran the entire magazine, which was a lot, which was, I think at the time, 120 pages every couple of months, but high quality stuff. So it wasn't just like throwaway one pages or something. It was essays. It was long form interviews. It was all that
Yes.
stuff, all translated. So there's a lot of work going into that. But I do think at the point where we picked up more money, more funding, because it was good, that's also the point when it was viewed more critically, you know. And then you could say that with the coming along of the Ukraine war, with the AfD stuff, I think the AfD actually, when the AfD came up, so the Alternative for Germany, and right-wing populism came up in Germany, that was a time when we got a lot of funding for the magazine because in Germany, many people were interested in how can we fight this? How can we publicly defend diversity, let's say? How can we talk about other cultures, other people? How can we talk about migration in terms that are positive, you know, to actually counterweigh this like wave of right-wing populism that we were seeing in maybe 2012, 2013. And I was actually in another job that I had back then for ZDF for television. I was actually very early on at the protests in East Germany, the anti-migration protests that happened there that were getting like a lot of traction and got like very widely reported, even though there was, in the big scheme of things, not that many people there, but it was just a shock to Germany that many people would go on the street and protest against migration. So that was a time when we got funding, and then you had the Ukraine war coming around and more of a geopolitical crisis, and then you can see how funding goes down again because you'd rather invest that money in weapons transfer rather than writing, you know. So even though I think that's of course I do think that's a very one-sided approach to things. I do think you need I do actually think that kind of journalism and that kind of writing is very, very necessary to stop those conflicts and to stop that very short-sighted mindedness of people in order to make them aware of what's going on abroad, make them aware of what other people are thinking. But yeah, that's when budget went down again. We didn't have that much money. And then it's, you know, people just care less, you know. In the Foreign Office, if you give somebody 200,000 euros in the Foreign Office, it's like, it's nothing, you know. So you just do whatever you do.
Yes.
If we had 5 million, maybe it would start to be more painful and people would ask questions, you know.
Getting back to something you said earlier, in introducing yourself, you indicated you would rather be seen as an editor than a reporter, or an editor rather than a journalist. I wonder if you could flesh that out a wee bit for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I think in Germany, so when you become a journalist, let's say, I don't know if it's the same in Britain, to be honest, and I don't even know if it's the same in the US, but we have this thing called voluntariat, which is kind of like you've done your studies and now you want to become a journalist, but you don't have to study journalism in order to become a journalist. And I think that's the same probably everywhere. You might as well work in journalism and do internships and then become a journalist just by the work that you've done already, you know. But so at the time, a lot of people were advising me, okay, you're studying international relations, you're studying politics, so then just intern with magazines, intern with television, and see what happens, which is what I did. But at the same time in Germany, there's this thing called voluntariat, and that's a 1 to 2 year training at a certain institution. And a lot of media organizations, television stations, magazines, radio stations offer that voluntariat, which is pretty much like a full-time job for 1 or 2 years in which you get paid very little, but you work just the same as anybody else. But it's great because you do learn just the intricacies of the job, and you're not considered an intern. You're just considered pretty much in most organizations part of the team. So you really, really get to work, and you get to, in television, for example, you would produce your own TV items, you would do your own news reports. It's not like you're just in the back making the coffee and doing the copying, but you're actually working with the team. So I did that for the magazine that we just talked about, and for Kulturaustausch. And that job was more of an editing job, to be honest, because, of course, that magazine publishes authors from abroad to then translate them into German and English to then make them available to the public. So the role of the editorial office there is not to necessarily write all the time themselves, but to edit other people's texts and to make them better. And then to, of course, long form interview people from abroad, experts, activists, politicians, journalists, which I did a lot at the time. So I could already feel that I was naturally drawn to, okay, I want to interview somebody. I want to think about what I want to discuss with them. I want to frame the conversation in a certain way. I do like this interaction of going back and forth. And I always had the feeling that there was some colleagues of mine, also in television, of course, where I worked before for a while, that were just more journalistic to me. They were more like this, like journalist to me, the standard journalist that I have in mind, like somebody who wakes up in the morning and then thinks, what's the story, What's the story today? Also, I relate that so much to this, like going to a press conference, getting information there, writing an article, waking up the next morning, pitching articles, going about your life that way, and also being driven by that. And I always felt like I'm not as driven by that kind of job, I have to say. I think my theory is that it's also a different kind of person who is intrigued by that kind of job. Because if it had intrigued me, I would have probably stayed in television. Because in television, that's really the thing. You wake up in the morning, you are stressed, you have to go somewhere to interview somebody, maybe some representative of a political party, you have to go to an event, you then run back to the studio, you have your camera guy, of course, you have your sound guy back then. I guess today it's all the same person. You have your camera on the shoulder, you have a microphone in your hand, and you run back, you edit it with a cutter back in the studio, you send it off to the studio or to the main station, and it gets broadcast, and everybody thinks it's very important, even if it's, let's say, just a regional meeting of the AfD somewhere in Brandenburg. But it is just this idea of we're constantly under pressure and stuff has to constantly be broadcast, and it's very important. And I just never felt that it was that important, to be honest. I still think it's good work, and it's the basis of everything that we're reading and seeing and listening to, local journalism especially, I feel like. But many of the things I just wasn't that impressed by, and also I could never really see the added value of this stuff being done so quickly. And in television especially, I could never see the value of somebody telling me, okay, now you go down there to Brandenburg and let's say I'll just take a real life example. There's a village that is being destroyed because Vattenfall, big energy provider, is building or is trying to expand their coal mine in the region. And then you go down there and you see, wow, this is a super complicated topic. There's people living here, there's different groups of people. Some think it's very important that Vattenfall is there because they work at Vattenfall. Then there's some people who are activists who are trying to stop that. Then there's the Vattenfall representative. So at least you have to talk to, then there's the mayor of the city. So you have to talk to 4 or 5 people. And then somebody tells you, okay, this is going to be a 1 minute and 30-second news item on the nightly news, and then you think, well, I'm gonna have to leave something out, and then you leave something out, you don't feel good about it, and then there's this added thing of, is it entertaining enough, which is what we talked about on my podcast a lot, this intersection of television and entertainment in reporting, and that just struck me as wrong. So I'm just much more interested in, I would never blame anybody for doing that kind of journalism, which I can totally get behind if it's done good, but I just felt like I couldn't do it good enough in order to feel good about it. So, and that's why I always, to make a long answer a little bit shorter, more drawn to editing, which I guess is also the basis for like interviewing. You know, I'm still somebody who writes, who thinks about questions, who once in a while comes up with a pitch for an interview to a magazine, but I'm much more interested in making something longer and better instead of something shorter and quicker, if that makes sense.
Sure. One of the things I find frustrating in TV news and current affairs here in Spain, but everywhere I've lived, is the tendency in news to go for moving images at all costs. So a story that might be about a so-called natural disaster or about political strife or about a law case involves the same images being recycled within the same report 4 or 5 times. People walking in and out of courtrooms, houses being washed away, whatever it might be. And we never see the people who are making the story. And we never see them as if they were other than in the water, outside the courthouse, wherever it might be. Absolutely mindless. When we do get to see people, it'll be a round table of 5 or 6 folks from different parts of the political spectrum who just shout at one another and who don't use facts or theories. They just have ideological perspectives that they inhabit. And I find both of these absolutely asinine and also incredibly boring. It's really boring seeing the same person getting out of a car and walking to a courtroom 5 times in the course of a 3-minute story. So I'm with you. I'm interested in how the magazine for you conceptually, emotionally, ideologically fits with your podcast. This longer form way of sharing ideas that is not waiting for an academic journal to publish something, but is really much more open-ended. Where do they sit together for you, the magazine and the podcast? Or don't they? Are they quite separate?
No, it's very much a line, I would say, because the subtitle of the magazine, which Kulturaustausch you could pretty much translate to cultural exchange in English. So to the German readership and the people abroad who are writing the texts are exchanging information or ideas. And the subtitle of that magazine is Magazine for International Perspectives. So that's pretty much what I'm doing on the podcast, just with an American focus. You know, I'm saying like I'm picking up on American debates, but I'm inviting people from abroad to talk about how they see these debates. And I always found that to be very, very inspiring in a way. When I started working at the magazine, I found it very interesting to hear or to read, let's say, what a Chinese cultural studies professor thinks about what's going on in Europe, you know? Like that's an interesting perspective. And then with a lot of takeaways, you know, there's just a lot of takeaways on like how are people in Ethiopia thinking about feminism, you know, like it's just like it seems a very wide net, of course, because the world is kind of your oyster and you could go anywhere to talk about anything. But the fact that in the magazine you always had like one topic, I think, let me take an example. One of my favorite magazines was probably, we had also a bit like, I think that one was a bit, potentially a bit overly conceptual, but it was a magazine about the richest country in the world by, I think, not GDP, but by relative income, and by and the poorest country in the world, which was at the time, I think, Qatar and the Central African Republic. And so you had this whole magazine of stories from the Central African Republic, not about poverty or about economics, but about real stories from the Central African Republic by people from Bangui, from the capital city, and then juxtaposed with stories from Qatar. And I found it so valuable to just like open this magazine and get this like view and hear these stories from people that you've never heard before and that you've never heard about, and that just have very interesting things to say that might actually start something in your mind as a reader, you know? might actually start to interest you in a way that it maybe wouldn't interest you if you heard the same person again on television talking about the same topic. I just feel like even though our media environment is so big and so diverse, and that's also why it's also my mission with the podcast a little bit. I do feel like both in Germany and the US, there is just still always the same people talking. In Germany, you will find on the talk shows, whoever gets interviewed on news shows, it is just a very, very small amount of still very white, I would say, still very, very German, very old school German, people from a very certain generation. And it's slowly starting to change, but it's still dominated, I would say, to a large extent by the same voices, and also voices from a certain political end of the spectrum, a political, let's say, like center-right people. So I do think there's always value in breaking that up. And I think it's also starting to happen a little bit. And I do think it's really important to work on starting to create counterweights, because I'm not really an online person, but I think it's important to get into that stuff and get into audio media, get into online media in order to pose a counterweight to right-wing stuff, because I do feel like right-wing stuff and right-wing populism has really, really penetrated that sphere especially.
Well, getting back to Obama, there was a time when in the United States, certainly, the so-called newer media were seen as the province of the liberal left, the Democratic Party and the left. It's quite clear that they have been gazumped. They have lost that hegemonic position, and that the right has colonized this domain extremely effectively in the US. And I think it's true in many other instances. They're always slow, they're not very artistic, but they're well-funded, they're thorough, and they're often very aligned when it comes to their hunger and thirst for power. So I think that's a very, very significant issue. In terms of the magazine, are you still involved at all now that you're in Richmond, Virginia?
So I was running it as the editor-in-chief for 2 years before I moved here, and then I didn't really see a way of continuing that while being in the US. So you're running a team, and there's a really good team of maybe, I would say, like 5, 6, 7 people with a contract, and then a lot of freelancers around that. And just the idea of pretty much, we had like daily meetings, we had like discussions, like 2-hour discussions every week. It just seems hard to imagine to do that from abroad and from a different time zone, especially. So that I gave up, but a colleague of mine actually took over, and who I'm still in touch with, and I'm still in touch with the team as well. And I actually just the other day finished an interview with, that we might have talked about before, with Arun Chaudhary, the first cameraman, is always his denomination, first cameraman of Barack Obama. And I did that for the magazine, actually. So I'm still, we talked about how campaigns are being run, and how big the entertainment factor of political ads has to be, all that kind of stuff, because he's also now advising the Harris-Walz campaign, and he's also advising campaigns in Europe, actually. So I did an interview on that, and that's going to be published in the next magazine. So I'm still working for them once in a while, but I'm not involved as an editor or chief editor exactly.
Now, in terms of that relationship between the magazine and the podcast, in the magazine, as you say, you're having daily meetings with 5 or 6 close colleagues and often interacting with others. You can see where my question's headed. It's towards the slightly anomic world. There you are in your bedroom or your study or wherever it is, with your baseball cap on, your headphones on, your microphone in front of you. But it's
you're painting a picture for everybody who's listening. I can see that.
It's not as though there's a group of 6 of you screaming at one another with different opinions on, what is the Enlightenment or what should we do about Habermas. You're quite isolated in a certain sense, and you're in a new country. So I wonder if you could talk about those 2 things, perhaps interrelatedly, perhaps separately. One, that being very alone in terms of cultural production compared to a television studio or compared to the magazine, And also the difference of your partner and you being together in Germany, where she's been for a while and where you're from, versus you're moving to entirely new terrain. Now, I'm not asking for a great confessional Catholic moment. I'm just interested in this question of a certain professional and in some ways personal isolation that can come with all these shifts.
I have to say I like that question. It's like, Kai, you are very alone. How do you feel about that?
You're a lonely bastard. What are you going to do about that?
What are you gonna do?
If
What are
you
you gonna do?
if you would rather answer in a different way, you could school me in how to pronounce correctly the first and last names of the incoming manager of the England men's football team.
Oh yeah, I can do both of that. I can do all of that at the same time.
Okay, so how is this as a starter, your starter for 10? Thomas Tuchel.
Yes, I think a little bit too much emphasis on the third syllable in the first name. Thomas
Thomas.
Tuchel.
Thomas Tuchel.
That was pretty good. Tuchel. Yeah, with an L in the end. Tuchel. Yeah.
Thomas Tuchel.
That was pretty good.
That's
Yes.
pretty good.
Okay,
Okay, right.
we got that out of the way.
We've got that one out of the way. Let's get on to the slightly less complicated matters.
So I'm alone. Um, so let me start with the first one. I think there is, I mean, for me, great value in working in a team, in a magazine. I think it's what I like
Yes.
most about working in magazines and working in journalism and in editorial office of all kinds, actually in television and magazines, wherever. I think that's one of the great things that you are getting paid to discuss topics with people, which is pretty amazing to me. It was kind of, for me, it's kind of the natural continuation of somebody who has like studied all kinds of things and feels like they're not good at anything specifically, but then just gets to sit down with people and can talk about everything and be like, I think this, and what do you think, and what are we gonna do? Which is good. I like that as a job. I like that as also a format of thinking, you know, like, and also this process of making a magazine is really unique to me. Of starting with a blank page and maybe like a mind map on a whiteboard of like, okay, we're making a magazine about Mexico. Like, what do we have to talk about, and what have other people talked about, and what do we not want to talk about, and how do we frame this whole thing? Because of course, there's a lot of also power in framing, you know, and how we're gonna like look at an issue. That's pretty much the power of an editorial office. And then who are we inviting to write about this? So that is definitely one of the things that I miss the most about that job, I would say. Even though probably not about the last 2 years in that job, because then I was the chief editor and not an editor. And with that role come a lot of things that you don't actually want to do, which is like organizing an office and thinking about money and all those things, which is much less interesting to me than thinking about topics and articles and texts, you know, and how to make them better. So in a certain way, that's leading me right into where am I now? So in a certain way, I do feel like that I've gotten back more, actually, gotten back more thinking about topics, texts, about ideas, you know, and coming up with my own stuff. I do miss the exchange with people, definitely. Of course, I do always think that my opinion is the best anyways in those discussions. So it's very nice to only discuss with myself. Not all true, but a little bit true that of course it's very easy to sit at home in your bedroom and think about the next podcast episode. And I do feel like it's nice in the podcast format, which you've been doing for so long, to you're still bouncing your ideas off someone, right? I can come up with an interview and I can come up with my questions, and then maybe I just talked to Noy Katzman yesterday for the next episode, who is actually an Israeli who lost his brother in the Hamas attack on the 7th of October last year, but is a peace activist and actually went on CNN a week after his brother got killed and called for the Israeli government to stop bombing Gaza, which is kind of amazing to me. And you have this whole thing prepared and all these questions and kind of like where you stand, and then the interview goes very differently and you're like, oh, interesting, like this is how they think about that topic, and I had thought about that before. So it's, I mean, a certain amount of framing is going on, of course, because I'm deciding like where are we going to go with this, but at the same time, I'm open to go wherever the interviewee wants to go, right? And I'm open to go into any direction that that they want to, and follow them down the road, or like push back at a certain point. So that is still there. I do still think, me as a person, I have come to conclude that I always need a little bit of everything, kind of. I think those last 2 years in Berlin were the first time that I ever held a full-time job for 2 years straight, I think. And before that, I had always been freelance, always working for like 3 or 4 different things at the same time. And I do like the feeling of that. It's not great for, let's say, it's not great for relaxing, like mentally, because you always have a lot of stuff in your head, and maybe in a full-time position you have like one thing to worry about. But I do like Monday I'm editing for this blog, and then on Tuesday I'm interviewing somebody, and then on Wednesday I'm thinking about the podcast. And so that's always been more my mode of working, which I really like. So I'm not too sad about that. And at the same time, I would like to go back into some sort of team environment. I do think, and it would be nice if it was a team environment here in the US as well, which is not that easy to find, I think, because I just came here from Germany as a German journalist. So all my clients and the people I work for are still German, because that's kind of my qualification, let's say. But it would be nice, and I do have projects right now that I'm working on with people. So there's an exchange, not as much as I had in the editorial office. That's right. And now, about me being alone in the US, or how your actual question was, how has the dynamic changed? Kind of, how's the couple's dynamic changed? Is that your question? Because I'm gonna answer it. You don't have to be shy about it, because I'm really, one of my favorite things is to talk about relationships. So in any form, so you don't have to worry. Okay, so we just talked about this actually a while ago, and it's really interesting that it kind of flipped the entire relationship dynamic in a way, which is interesting, because I think it happens naturally when somebody comes to. So my partner didn't come to Germany because I was in Germany, but we just met shortly after she came to Germany. But still, she was in a different country and trying to find her footing and staying there longer than expected. And I had been living in Berlin for 11, 12 years. So then naturally, I think, add the whole like gender dynamics, I think, on top of that, and you have a situation where like I'm like doing all the organizing, and like I'm like sending all the letters, and I'm like I don't know, going to the Ausländerbehörde, like the migration office, with her to like get her visa and all that stuff, you know. So there's like one person who like knows about the culture and is in charge of organizing that stuff and trying to get it figured out, and one person who's like trying to get settled. And it's also, of course, like less, I think, just less secure, of course, in a new country, you know. You're just really trying to get used to what's going on in Germany, you know. I think my partner was a bit shocked as well in the beginning by it's not that easy to get to know Germans. It's a little bit cold in Berlin, especially. It's like probably like moving to New York, where everybody has their little group and is very cool, you know. Sometimes too cool to talk to you in public, which is the opposite in the US, I have to say. People are very nice in public, especially down in Virginia. And so you have those dynamics, and then now we've turned it around where I'm in the US and I had to get a green card, and I had to talk to USCIS all the time, and then it's Homeland Security and they don't send me my green card, and I'm like, don't have a bank account. It's like, oh God, what are we going to do? I don't know what I'm doing. And so then suddenly that changes, and I think it's had a very positive effect on us understanding each other's position in the other world, so to say, of understanding how it is both the pressures related to both of those positions: pressure of being in a new country and trying to figure out life, and the pressure of being the one who's like in his or her country and being responsible in a way, you know, also being responsible for the other person. I wouldn't frame it like that theoretically, but practically, I think feeling wise, it does happen easily that you think, okay, I'm only here because you're an American. I wouldn't have been here otherwise. And then you go down that entire road, and we're trying not to, but I think that's you can't get out of this responsibility role. Like here, she's the one who's American and who is in that position, and in Germany, I'm the one who's German and who's in that position to a certain extent. So that has been let's say it's been interesting. I don't think it's definitely been challenging. It's been interesting, but I haven't felt very alone yet, to answer the very last thing that you brought up. And I think that is simply because, first of all, my partner already knew some people here who I already know as well now. And then also I have to say, I don't know if I should say this publicly in a podcast, but nobody of my friends will know that I was on this podcast if I don't tell them. So maybe I just won't tell them. Is that I was actually kind of relieved for the first couple of months after moving here of this like social calendar that I had in Berlin. So in Berlin was like all full of a dinner and a breakfast and a lunch and work and all that stuff. And when I came here, it was all gone. And I really appreciated that for a couple of months. And I don't think the podcast would have happened without that, to be honest. So I'm trying to find the good things in each, let's say, in each country and in each of the positions that I'm in, let's say.
You sound like Jurgen Klopp signing for Red Bull. Not really.
I do think I do sound like him when he quit Liverpool. Just like,
well,
I need to get out of here and I'm run down.
And well, it's interesting. He claims to have this man of the people, I like heavy metal, I have very white teeth thing. That means that he is the true spirit of Dortmund, the true spirit of Liverpool and leftism, and now he's something else. But
it's been we can talk about that too. It's been a rough couple of days, I tell you, for somebody who's a Dortmund fan. Me.
Are you? Oh yeah. And people feel let down, don't they?
People do feel let down, and I think I knew we were going to start talking about football at some point, and it's now happening. People are very let down, and I've listened to a lot of stuff coming out of the German news and the German podcasts that I listen to. People are kind of surprised that it's that big of a deal, but I don't think they should be that surprised. Because if he just like went to Dortmund and Liverpool and then went to Red Bull, it'd be okay. But I do think you have to factor in that it's not only other people who made him that person. He was playing with this whole like idea of, I'm the working class guy who is like going to the working class clubs and who is opposed. Maybe he wasn't opposed to, I don't think he was ever opposed to money necessarily. He's been in, I think, 100,000 television ads for some of the like worst companies in Germany. So I never thought he like had a big like ethic on that, to be honest. But he did present himself in that way, right? If it was Thomas Tuchel going to Red Bull, nobody would give a shit.
They'd expect it. They'd expect it. So to finish off, I wonder if I could invite you, Kai, to add anything you might wish. This could be a promotion for your podcast. It could be a promotion for the magazine. It might be something we haven't talked about at all. Is there something you'd like to share with us just now? And then I'll tell you how to pass the citizenship test when your time comes.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm staying long enough to pass that. No, I don't want to talk about the podcast again because I feel like we've talked about it more than enough. We did talk about the magazine a little bit, but I do think you did a very good thing by in summarizing it, actually, what the magazine is doing. And I do actually just want to use it to advertise that magazine, to be honest, because it's a really, really good and really, let's say, really a good quality magazine that isn't read enough by enough people, that is also publishing in English on the website, so you can read English articles if you're an English native or if you speak English. And it's just a very, very rich magazine with very interesting authors that you probably haven't read before, probably also some authors that you have read before but that you thought very well of. And it's a really good team that's doing the work there, and I can only recommend anyone to read in, to get the newsletter. Potentially, if you speak German, you can get the newsletter. It might also be in English now, and just check it out because it is a good source of long form news, or like, let's say, long form background information, and not this like daily cavalcade of tiny little news pieces, but very, very long form essays and interviews on important stuff. So check it out.
Nice, thank you. If and when you decide you want to become a citizen, if it's anything like it was in my day, which was when Obama was president, and there have been some changes under Trump's regime, there are a couple of questions about the war that you have to get right. So you have to answer what was Dwight D. Eisenhower's job before becoming president. The true answer is he was president of Columbia University. That would be a fail, because the answer you must give is Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces in Europe. And then the other bullshit question is, which countries won the war? And of course, the war only means one thing for these purposes. And the correct answer is France, which last I saw was mostly occupied and was sending Jewish folks and other oppressed peoples off in railway cars to be slaughtered. England, which last I saw wasn't a combatant. There was Great Britain, which in the United Kingdom. So, there were Scottish and Irish and Welsh people. And someone called America. So the fact that 25 million Soviets died in the war against fascism and helped to save the world, sorry, you don't count, completely irrelevant. So be very careful not to mention the Soviet Union in the war question, okay?
Now I'm wondering if that was that your answer in the interview?
I talked to my...
And they still let you be an American? Is that what they did?
Well, there are 100 questions and you can take a practice test. They can ask you any 10 on the day. You've got to get 6 right. I talked to my immigration attorney about the Eisenhower answer and the war answer, both of which I thought were appalling. And also the fact that you had to name the current US president. And I wanted to call him Barack Hussein Obama II, which is his name, which was unacceptable. You could not say Hussein. Surprise, surprise. So I put this to my immigration attorney saying, I want to tell the answers, give up correct answers, and maybe I can educate the immigration service. He said, do you want to become a citizen or not?
Yeah, makes sense.
Then the next phase, Kai, is when you have to attend a service where you are inducted. And these come, if you live in a place like I did, LA, in 2 forms, either 300 people or 3,000 gathered at one. For various complicated reasons, I had to have my own ceremony in front of a judge, just me. There's a moment where you have to agree to bear arms on behalf of the United States. And the judge said to me, Mr. Miller, why do I simply not believe you will ever do that?
Well, very realistic judge.
My friends who were there and the judge and her associate are killing themselves laughing because they know what I am. In any event, thank you very much, Kai. It's been wonderful chatting to you. The magazine is great. The podcast is great. There's one bum episode, but that happens. And all the very best for the future.
Thank you so much. Same to you.